Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome to the sixth task force meeting. And as you'll see from tonight's agenda, it's a meeting for catching up on the various projects and where they're up to. There's a lot of work going on, and so it'll be good to get all the details from people tonight. So thank you for making the time, especially on a nice evening like this. Christy, do we have any apologies?
Oh, sorry, just somebody else wants to be let in. Just bear me 1 second, John Beckett. I have had apologies from Kathy Partington and Nicola said.
Okay, great, thanks very much. And because we're recording, I like to do the introductions again, even though we know each other. It just makes it easier for the recording then for people to know who was at the meeting. So I'll go down the minutes of the last meeting's presence, as we usually do, and ask you to introduce yourselves very briefly. So, Tammy.
Good evening, Tara Huntley, Sustainability Officer from the University of Chester.
Stephen Hughes. Stephen not joined us yet, perhaps. Roy Newton.
Hi everyone, I'm Roy Newton from Cheshire and Warrington Local Enterprise Partnership. I'm the Transport Director and Investment at the lab.
Thank you, Roy. Stephen Perry. Stephen's on mute.
Sorry. Stephen Perry, hi everybody. I'm representing the Active Travel Forum, but I'm also helping to lead the Active Travel project team and the Upton project team. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thanks very much. Bernadette Bailey.
Hello, Bernadette Bailey. I'm Programme Lead for a team with Cheshire CCG.
Excellent. Thanks, Bernadette. David Beer.
Good evening. I'm David Beer. I'm Senior Manager at Transport Focus, the National Watchdog.
Excellent. Thank you very much, David. Mike Hogg.
Mike Hogg, and I'm the Chair of the Chester Residents Association Group.
Lovely. Peter Bulmer.
Peter's not able to come. He's personal business.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you, John. Andy Farrell.
Andy Farrell, representing the Chester Business Improvement District and the Chester Growth Partnership, and Andy Farrell Limited.
Thanks very much. Robert Pickering.
Good evening, Rob Pickering. I lead for British Cycling in the north of England.
Anya Miller.
Hi, I'm Anya Miller and I'm a representative from the Youth Senate.
Lovely, thank you very much, Anya. And David Whitehead.
Hi, I'm David Whitehead. I'm the Chair of Huntingdon Parish Council and a member of the Active Travel Group.
Rob Pickering.
Sorry, Garfield, I've not just done myself.
It's okay. Have you not done? Have you done yourself? For some reason, Darren has been present and absent last time, so I was now reading the absence list to see.
Right.
Maybe that just needs tweaking. Were you here last time?
I thought I was, but perhaps I can't remember exactly.
Perhaps you're like one of these electrons that can spin in both directions simultaneously.
Indeed.
Indeed. Tim Kenny. Tim not here. Okay. Alex Bell.
Hi, I'm Alex Bell and I'm representing the Youth Senate.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Alex. Claire Roberts. Nope. Okay. And Christy.
Christy Littler, Transport Infrastructure Team Secretariat for the group today.
Thanks very much. And Lynn.
Lynn Mackay, Secretariat for the group today.
Okay, and I'm Garfield Southall. I'm chairing tonight. Anybody have missed?
John Beckett, Garfield, Parish Councillor Christleton and Joint Lead of the South East Chester Pilot.
Welcome, John. Thanks very much indeed. Okay.
Mike Garrett's nominally representing freight, but giving technical assistance to the A51 EATL working group and other groups.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Mike. Okay, so we'll go on then to item 4, declaration of interest. Has anybody got any declaration which they feel they should make known? Okay, that's usually the case, but thanks very much. So you've had the minutes from Christy. Has anybody any corrections to make to those minutes? Any points to raise which they feel they'd like to check and query? Okay, that's good. Thanks very much indeed, and thanks, Christy, for doing those. Quite a lengthy set of minutes, that. There were no matters arising, so I think we can leave those as a record of that meeting and move on then to the meat of tonight's presentations. I think just before we start on these, I'd just like to kind of point out to everybody on the call tonight just the number of people that are now involved in these various projects. They're growing nicely, and the amount of work that's been going on is extensive, and I think you'll see that tonight from the representations that we have. As you see these presentations and you think to yourself, you know, I'd like to contribute to that, there's still opportunities. We always welcome people who've got a keen interest in the work that we're doing, and we'd always welcome you. So either get in touch with either Christy or myself, or directly to the leads if you like, and just make your ideas known. We'd really welcome that. So thanks very much. So I think we'll move down to number 7 then, and I'm just going to share my slides. So just hang on a minute, Stephen, while I get my presentation on the screen. Right, colleagues, can you see a title slide there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, thank you. So, over to you, Stephen.
Well, actually, I'm going to hand across immediately to Mike. Mike and Andy are going to lead in this presentation, and then followed by Dave Whitehouse as key members of this group. So over to you, Mike.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Right, well, good evening, everyone. I'm going to go through a few introductory slides. Andy will then go through some more detail. I'll come back again at the end, and then Dave will talk about communications. So I'm more or less going to read out these slides with a few extra comments, because I appreciate tonight is being recorded, and it's kind of good to be, I think, as clear as possible. So at the end of our phase 1 review, we recommended the operation of the experimental active travel lanes should be paused, and that has taken place. And their operation was suspended, as people appreciate, last month. Since then, we've been working on the phase 2 of our project to identify opportunities that might improve the operation of the travel lanes. And so this presentation is really to share our ideas so far. They are provisional, and I'll be caveating them appropriately as we go forward. So next slide, please. I think what the EATL experiment demonstrated was that reducing road space for private motorised traffic could add to congestion without necessarily helping the active travel modes, i.e. there were measures which didn't necessarily deliver the objective. And that was confirmed by the before and after studies which the local authority commissioned, and that identified the impact of constraints on one corridor could actually knock on into other corridors. So you have to take, I think, a holistic approach to this for the whole of Chester, and we'll maybe come back to that later on in the presentation. I think it's important to remember that the purpose of any transport corridor is to facilitate mobility and thus economic activity. So maintaining the capacity available is a key objective. I say that in the knowledge that some people, I think, would regard traffic constraints as a good thing. But I think we have to be very careful in that respect, because that is going to damage the case for, or the objective of getting buy-in from all parties, and I don't think it's going to do the local economy too much good. I'd just like to make a point there about our last event when we heard that excellent presentation from Groningen. The evidence there was that I think 65% of traffic coming, or people coming into Groningen from outside the city, actually came by private transport, despite the excellent rail network that we all know the Netherlands provides. So you can't sort of ignore that, and we tried to take that carefully into account. Our analysis suggests that we need to consider the network represented at least by the whole triangle, from the Barrs Roundabout going out to the Sainsburys Roundabout, Hall Lane to the north, Sunday Lane to the south. That is because people take different routing strategies, they take different modes, and if you take a measure on one road, you're going to have impacts on others. And indeed, another comment that was made by one of the contributors to our meetings was that also in the Netherlands, it was strategy sometimes to basically make the vehicles go further so that the active travel routes could be more direct. And I think that's something we'll sort of come back to. The principle we have followed is to identify measures to facilitate steady and uninterrupted traffic flow, to minimize the road space required by vehicular traffic, to retain the space required for active travel or bus lanes without causing congestion, potentially requiring some rerouting of traffic. So that's been our approach. So next slide, please. So thinking specifically about the Boughton Corridor, it provides access to and from the city centre, and it provides for the local mobility for residents. Now, in terms of local mobility, the transferability to active modes is obviously quite strong. It's only 2 kilometres from the Ring Road to the Barrs Roundabout. These are not long distances. So walking and cycling is an obvious opportunity, but it isn't necessarily an opportunity for all the vehicular traffic coming from outside the city that wants to get to the city centre, if the city centre is to prosper. Again, I reflect, going back to the Groningen presentation, Groningen is a city in a large rural area. Chester is in active competition with places very close to Chester which offer free parking. You can't ignore that. The gross width of road space available in this corridor is often very generous. I make it about 26 metres in next to the Boughton shops, next to Heath Lane, between one wall and the other, which is about as wide as a motorway. And you get the same width as well opposite Waitrose. So there is space there. It's a question of how to use that space intelligently and efficiently for several different modes, which by and large means reducing the road space being used by private vehicles to accommodate other more sustainable transport modes. So the solution may be, and we will see how we've approached this, to limit or remove any potential restrictions along the general use carriageway that disrupts the traffic flow. Analysing the impact of any of those measures, we hope, in the near future, by using the origin destination data, which the local authority very fortuitously and happily commissioned in autumn 2019. So next slide, please. So our approach has been to discuss the challenges presented by the current EATLs, using the wide representation in the working group, and of course, extending our reach to the South East Chester Christleton group, which is represented here today and may want to make some comments. Identify how the limitation and lack of continuity of the EATLs as installed can be addressed. To look at what impact to the EATLs would have, changes to the EATLs would have on existing road users, including pedestrians, because pedestrian crossings also impact on road capacity, mitigating such impact through rerouting and design, and then to develop ideas to be tested against movements data as soon as possible, and as soon as possible get them validated by the local authorities' engineers. Given that the local authority is of course the delivery agency. Our ideas include junction remodelling, reduced right-hand turns, speed reductions to better facilitate pedestrian crossings and lane sharing, signage to encourage traffic to select most appropriate radial to enter the area, to avoid unnecessary right turns very often, and options to redesign the Barrs Roundabout. And finally, to validate our ideas that in such a way that they can be tested against actual traffic. So next slide for me is my last one. So our ideas for experimental improvements. Our primary objective is to present ideas that will enable us to retain and extend the travel lane for more sustainable travel without causing traffic congestion in the remaining lane. And the new travel lane could then be used for buses, bus and cycle lane, two-way cycle lane. That at the moment is, as it were, up for grabs. Our primary concern at this stage is to, as it were, find the space for such a lane, because the decision as to how to use that available lane can then be taken at the next stage. So next slide, please. So the nature of our proposed improvements, these are ideas, not final decisions. The impact of all of these ideas can be further reviewed with members of the Sustainable Transport Taskforce and with local interest groups. They will also require further data analysis and traffic modelling, and they will need full discussion and final agreement with the local authority. So, and now I think I hand over to Andy, who will go through, next slide onwards, the detail.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Mike.
Andy.
Thanks,
So,
Mike.
just picking up from some of the key points that Mike made there. We've got a little bit of feedback on my mic somewhere. I don't know if there's if we can all go muted on that. Perfect. So as Mike suggested, there is a much wider scope. Can we go back a slide, please? There's a much wider scope for Chester and the areas impacted. So on this slide here, we're showing that neither of the experimental active travel lane corridors can be treated in isolation. The decisions that are made along the Boughton Corridor impact these wider areas. So for example, with the Boughton Corridor, the impact of what happens on the travel lanes impacts Vickers Cross, it impacts Boughton Heath, it impacts Huntingdon, as far out as Criston and into the city centre as well. And therefore, we remind everybody here the importance of having that origin and destination data that Mike's said we'll be getting. And once we have it, that will help to drive and make decisions moving forward. So just zoning in a little bit onto that sort of next corridor on the next slide, please. So we're primarily focused on this area. You'll notice that this is a wider area than the original experimental active travel lane. And the intention is that we realised that we needed to consider the whole of that stretch from the Barrs out to the Sainsburys Roundabout to improve flow, work on the capacity, and just make it work better for our residents and visitors to Chester. The idea, the consequence of thinking like this is a more joined up thinking for connectivity and flow. If we go on to the next slide. More importantly, as mentioned already, with improved signage to get people to the right place and push the route decisions further out of town, e.g. at the ring road stage, we can then encourage the use of the preferred arterial routes to get to certain destinations, such as the centre of town, or the new Northgate development, or Sealand Road, or the zoo, or wherever that may be. But it's a key thing, and the aim there is that will relieve some of the pressure if people are already anticipating where they need to go ahead of their route, ahead of getting on the route. On the next slide there. So one of the key ideas that we want to bring in here, and probably the most critical is the idea of implementing 20 mile an hour along the corridor from Barrs out to Sainsburys Roundabout. It's the idea is that it will help manage the flow. It will effectively turn the taps down. We have a certain pipe width, and we need to reduce the water flow going through that. So it's the idea of improving the flow. The intention is to increase the safety along that route as well. And the consequence is that it will respect the residential areas that exist along those routes. And as we already know, and we've seen elsewhere, that the 20 zones that are already implemented within Chester have been reported as being successful and generally approved of. So there's an idea here that we can apply this along the corridor and gain benefits from that. So I'll go into further details on the next slide, please.
Hang on a second.
Okay, thank you. And just sort of expand on the impact of 20 miles an hour. So one of the key things is that it should and will improve and create smoother vehicle flow. Combined with that is the consequence of reduced air pollution and particulates, because you have better flow of the vehicles, so there's less acceleration and deceleration. Obviously, there's an improved safety. We all know that driving slower gives more time to make decisions. But also as a benefit to those people trying to access the corridors from the side roads, there's better access, there's more space to turn in, turn out, and consequently you achieve less stressful driving. One of the challenges to the 20 mile an hour limitation is, how does it get policed? And I would challenge that by saying, well, how do you police 30 miles an hour already? It's self-policed effectively. It would enable the opportunity to introduce some smart traffic management potentially. And with that slower speed there, it should be easier to predict what's going on. And it could be a precursor to citywide, because it's important to reflect here that the distance from the A41 to the centre of the Barrs Roundabout is 2 kilometres. That's 1.2 miles. And a change in speed of 30 miles an hour to 20 miles an hour will probably, or the maths proves it, is increasing your travel time by 1 minute. So it's there's a change of thinking there, but I think the 20 mile an hour will just enable a more relaxed environment, a safer feeling environment, a friendlier environment to then start mixing the traffic and the people using the roads. So on the next slide, I highlight this point. You'll see on the left there's a blue "We Are Here" sign. So with the lanes as they are, they're at 30 miles an hour, and according to the LTM 120 guidelines, with mixed traffic, bus and cycle lanes, this is the guidelines for cycle infrastructure, with mixed traffic in, 30 miles an hour is fairly limited and not giving access for most people that choose to cycle or walk alongside them. But with that 20 mile an hour in place, we could easily be moved up the scale into the green zone for large parts of the day along that Boughton Corridor. There's something to think about there. So it's, the introduction of the 20 miles an hour would increase the safety and make the existing ATL as they are more accessible to everyone. But then obviously we're going to be talking about additional ideas to improve everything that we've got already. So on the next slide, we'll talk about the next idea. One of the key issues with the lanes as they went in was the connection and access to, in particular for the Boughton Corridor, getting onto the active travel lane. Our proposal here, and a lot of the dismay or not dismay, but frustration, was getting around Smiths Roundabout. And part of that is linked to connectivity from Gt Boughton Village, or from Gt Boughton itself. So the proposal here is to add an additional lane of westbound travel lane, starting from the Heath Lane lights, where the existing cycle path on the north side of that road from Sainsburys Roundabout to Heath Lane runs out, and then connecting that through to Simon Boyd lights. The reason for that is that when you come from the Sainsburys Roundabout, it's a single lane. As it gets to the point, and I'll go on to, if we move on to the next slide, I'll talk through this. So you can see here on the bottom right of the screen is Heath Lane, and we run right through to Bill Smith's at the top left with the yellow line going across there. From Heath Lane right up to the just past Stocks Lane is single lane each way. Then at Simon Boyd's, it expands to 2 lanes, both those lanes going straight on. One of our proposals is that we should maintain a single lane through there and turn that left-hand lane at Simon Boyd into a left-hand lane and EATL only lane. So if we go on to the next slide, this is the view from Heath Lane and approaching the Heath Lane lights. Single lane carriageway here. This is where the existing cycle lane terminates, and then you're kind of fighting with the traffic as you head into the shops here at Boughton and out the other side to Bill Smith. So we go on to the next slide here. You can see that there's, as Mike has already said, plenty of space along here. When you actually look at this, the real estate that's in the roads here, it's double lane. There's enough for putting in a cycle lane or something of that width alongside the road here without even impacting on the existing roads. There are some issues with parking along here. If you go to the next slide, just past the Stocks Lane turn, you can see there's parking there, and there's some interest about whether that needs restriction or what we need to do there and how that would impact residents in the area. And then if we go on to the next slide again, this is where currently the road splits from single lane into 2 lanes, currently both going straight on. And the idea here is that actually by introducing a left turn only and EATL lane on the left hand side of this, that would help to improve the flow and connection onto the travel lanes and Bill Smiths and then onto the travel lanes moving forward. So just to go to the next slide. Highlighted on this slide where it may be of interest to look at what the impact of introducing parking restrictions here. In our discussions within the working group, it's been suggested that perhaps people are parking here and then walking into town anyway. So we need to look at the impact of what happens there. There needs to be more consultation, more understanding of what's happening, and we need to gather other information. So moving on from the Boughton connection, the next idea, this is idea number 3, is on the next slide, and is the idea that Bill Smiths Gyratory becomes a roundabout. There's a whole load of thought and ideas that could be done here. We could make the lights not in use. We could prioritize traffic from the right. It would make sense to implement a coloured tarmac on the gyratory itself to raise awareness that something is different in that area that might help to improve the environment. And the idea is that with 20 miles an hour in place, everyone starts to take care. It becomes a little bit more like the area outside the railway station, but obviously with some traffic control in place there. But with this reduction in speed and the idea that there's more of a roundabout and more respectful driving in place, then it's possible that you could start to put zebra crossings in, which would help to increase flow, because one of the frustrations at Bill Smiths that we're aware of is that the light sequencing is a little bit peculiar. It might be that with a reduced speed coming in, that the light sequencing could be improved as well. So just if we move on to the next slide, you'll see, thank you, there's a couple of issues here. One is the concept of this right turn. So we know that in peak periods, people turning right where Spittal Walk comes in can cause congestion, whether there's traffic or whether there's EATLs or not at this location. It can cause a problem with people turning right, and you only need 2 or 3 cars to impact here. So the idea is that in combination of having this roundabout effect on the junction here, introducing some giveways and asking people to sort of drive more carefully around here, we can start to improve on the flow. And I don't want to take too much time up on the technical detail here, but this is one of the ideas that we think will help. Something else that's an issue that we need to address as well as part of this, we've highlighted parking restrictions down on Sandy Lane. Again, there can be issues with flow out of Bill Smiths in the southerly direction, which hopefully we'll be able to model and test along with this idea. So this is quite a neat idea. I think it would be have significant benefit to improving the flow in this area heading westbound into town from both the A51 and from the Boughton shops. On the next slide, talk about an additional piece that kind of sits hand in hand with Bill Smith's, and at that Spittal Walk end, we know that there's a lot of people coming from Hull towards Huntington using that crossing. Again, the lights, I believe the term were take forever to change. If you're trying to cross the road as a pedestrian or as a cyclist at that point, to head north-south across the junction there. So there's a number of options that we can look at and investigate. Maybe there's a cycle feeder route from Sandy Lane onto Boughton along the mount there. But more importantly, we need to think about the connection for pedestrians and cyclists heading north-south, Sandy Lane to Spittal Walk and towards Hull and back. So moving further west onto the next slide. Another idea that we want to address, and again, this is all about, we know that turning right along this corridor causes problems. So the idea here is to encourage better flow westbound. And the proposal or the thought is that perhaps we should implement or test a no right turn into Hall Lane from the A51, and also implement a no right turn out of Hall Lane onto the A51. So coming from Hall towards the centre of town. So if we look at the next slide, for those that don't recognise the photos here, we're talking about this junction here, where one or two cars in the turn right central reservation piece at the moment causes congestion. Again, this was before the ATLs, and during the ATLs it causes a problem. And that we would like to sort of investigate further what the options are for removing that right turn heading westbound and maintain it as a left turn only heading eastbound. Again, there's a lot that needs to be researched there. I've just seen a question come up. We'll pull questions at the end if that's okay. So next slide. Another thought moving further along the corridor is, could we have a left exit only from Waitrose? Again, we don't have enough information and data. Someone's just gone no exclamation mark. I presume that's in relation to Waitrose. But it's an idea. It may or may not work, and we need to get more information and data to test that. So as we said earlier on, these are ideas at this stage. These are not firm proposals. These can be challenged at any time. They will need to be taken to QUAC and discussed as ideas and examined with data and modelling before anything happens moving forward. But this is just one of the ideas that would help increase capacity and flow and congestion east-west, if that's what we're aiming to achieve here. So there is some proposal to speak to Waitrose and the new hotel owners and see whether they would be willing to help us and work with a trial on this. We suspect that there was quite a fair bit of modelling that went into this junction design already, and it may not be necessary. So, but we'll see how that goes. And again, it depends on the origin destination data and understanding where the majority of traffic comes into and out of Waitrose. Moving further west onto the next slide, next idea is, it's very clear. We've talked about connectivity for what happens when you get to the end of the lane. So that's always a challenge with any active travel lane, cycle lane, road, or whatever it is that goes in. What happens when you get to the end of it? And as a user of the EATL running into the Barrs Roundabout, one of the challenges is you either head into the road that heads around to the Grosvenor Park. If you want to go straight on, there isn't any legal access into Foregate Street, and we also know that's you often see not only pedestrians, not only cyclists, but also pedestrians fighting with the traffic on the actual live lane rather than using the pavements and the subways. We know the reasons for that. So one of the proposals is that we could implement a contra cycle lane along Foregate Street, or direct traffic around Grosvenor Park Road and Love Street to a shorter contra flow to get into Foregate Street. There's all sorts of things that could happen there. These ideas need to be supported by an increase in secure cycle parking across the city centre, and they also need to be considered with the the implementation of a one-way access route around that southern inner city ring road round to Grosvenor Bridge, and even with the option of making a one-way circuit, Hanbridge, Lower Bridge Street, Grosvenor Bridge as well as an option there. If we look at the next slide, there's a number of options on this image here. Highlighting with the double yellow is the contraflow cycle lane from Barrs along Foregate Street. The alternative to that, or another option for that, would be to head into the Grosvenor Park Road, come in on Love Street, and it all needs to be considered with what happens once the works for Clockwise Chester has happened. Is it something that is going to continue? Is there an appetite for that? It needs to be considered moving forward and modelled accordingly. Continuing the focus on Barrs, if we look at the next slide, thank you. One of the things we identified at Barrs and is the way the lanes work here. There's a lot of roads connecting at this junction, as we know, and I think there's a lot of congestion created here that is caused by people not knowing what lane they're in. There's a lot of choice here. The area in the circle has 4 lanes across the junction there, all heading either south or east, and you know, there's a number of different options that need modelling and thinking about. If you reduce into 20 miles an hour, it's already a slow junction, so that's not a biggie. Can we reduce route choice here to improve flow? And then can we mitigate the effect of this tight corner that's highlighted in the lower arrow here? Can we mitigate the impact of that corner, which certainly causes some interest in driving around there? Could that be limited through route choice at the earlier spot shown in the slide there? So then, if we move on to the next slide, we appreciate that we've not really touched on the outbound options at this stage. We have talked about them, we've considered some ideas, but not in the same detail. And the reason for that is that we believe that the flow is better heading eastbound along the A51 corridor. And we also acknowledge that it will be impacted by whatever happens on the inbound ideas, first of all. So what we're proposing here is that we're not going to present much in the way of outbound ideas here, because we appreciate that that will be impacted by whatever ideas we start to model moving forward. However, there is one exception to this. I've said we're not talking about outbound, but on the next slide, we know that there's a key route, and let's call it a pinch point or an area where traffic gets held up by the lighting cycle on this particular junction, which goes where cyclists and pedestrians come up from the River Dee on D Lane and from Grosvenor Park and head across to Russell Street, heading towards the canal and towards the station. It's a known route. It's a necessary route for access heading eastbound from D Lane towards out of town on bikes, and it's a source of frustration for people coming off Barrs in their cars and buses and trucks, and then finding that the lights, because of the sequencing, are still on red, but there's nobody crossing, or you're waiting to cross and they take forever to change. So there's two things. One is to consider individual lane controlled lights for either side. The consequence of that would be that there would need to be at this stage, some sort of refuge in the middle that was sort of more protective for people waiting for the lights to change. Is that required with a 20-mile-an-hour zone in place as well? And then, but the other thing to think about on the next slide is that actually, if we go back to one of the most critical ideas, the first point in this presentation being the introduction of 20-mile-an-hour along the corridor, then maybe a zebra crossing is enough here. And that will help with the outflow of traffic. It will make things a lot easier, or reduce the frustration of people trying to cross the road in both vehicles and on foot and on bike. So an interesting sort of thing to finish off, but highlighting the importance of that 20-mile-an-hour implementation. So I'm conscious of the time. I see a number of questions coming up. I think I need now to pass over to Mike for the last couple of slides. Mike.
Thanks, Andy. Right, I'll be very brief. Next slide, please. Thank you. What we're seeking is the task force's support to take these ideas forward. They're ideas, they're not kind of concrete proposals, they're there to investigate. To use the origin and destination data, which we know is available, to validate our ideas and to test them and to examine just how many people are making those right turns and they don't have alternative strategies available. To share the ideas with the other task force teams, and we're already sharing our ideas and working with the South East Chester group who may wish to comment after this presentation. And to engage with the local authority highways team to test, refine and develop our proposals, model those proposals if possible prior to any actual experimentation. And if I can just break off for a second, I've been noticing some of this dialogue that Andy was mentioning about the 20 miles an hour issue and the conditions for implementing. The main condition on 20 mile an hour introduction is residential. Are the streets residential? And basically, we're talking about a residential street here. So, reaching agreement, therefore, on what can be done as part of an additional experiment, when this should be done, and how to engage and communicate with the community in that process further. So, in conclusion, next slide. Any questions? And we're here to seek further support for running with these ideas. Thank you. Is the proposal that Dave presents now?
We've got quite a number of questions. I think it would be useful to pick up some of them now, Dave. Mike and Andy. We probably can't do them all. So what we'll do is ensure that we capture the chat, in text, then you can refer to them later. So I think what I'd like to do then, since we have so many, could people put their hands up if they want to actually raise the question? And that would probably be easier than just working down the list, which would take a while. So I don't see any hands going up yet. So yes, Andy Farrell.
Yeah, great presentation, huge amount of details, and I shudder to ask a question with all that knowledge. Actually, the one I have is probably a challenge to you, really, in that you seem to have made the assumption that the travel lanes would be retained, and the role your brief is to improve their operation. And I can understand that from a cycling point of view, but I would question the bus lane bit, because if you're keeping the bus lane bit, then that's caused, lots of controversy. And actually, surely the objective isn't to retain the lanes and make them work better, is actually to tackle or enhance and manage mobility better, tackle congestion, and enhance and improve mobility. So it's not about retaining the lanes. And the reason why I say that is that asking the question about, did you explore other ways of managing capacity than just inflexible lanes? Because I think that's an issue for me. For example, many people manage capacities on these sorts of radials, not by lanes, bus lanes particularly, manage it by improving junctions and smart junctions, because it's junctions that slow traffic down and cause congestion, not the capacity of the road in many instances. I know you like your hands up, you're going to answer me in a moment, I know. So the issue is whether we can manage this more effectively, not by kind of rigid lanes and inflexible lanes, but a more smart way of managing junctions and flows and priorities. So you're actually not having a lane. You may improve the numbers of people in the numbers of mobility forms in such a lane, for example, car sharing and all the rest of it. But also, is there a more effective way of managing it rather than an inflexible lane? Question mark.
Like, well, any of us will give the similar answers, I suspect. But I absolutely agree with you about junctions. It's conflicting movements at junctions which create the problem. Yeah. So what we did was, first of all, look at those and then ask ourselves the question, did that create the space if those ran better and we didn't waste? To put it as simple as, if you have a right-hand turn, not only does that double the amount of road space you need because you need the right-hand filter, but it also interrupts traffic coming the other way as well. So that's the simplest way of talking about right-hand turns. And if you sorted that out, you had a chance not only of improving the flow, maintaining the capacity into town, but also creating the space for another lane of traffic, which could be segregated and would probably be cycling. But we were not ruling out bus, because that was the next set of decisions, really. We're trying to take it step by step.
And can I
can understand? Yeah. Sorry,
can I add something to that as well? So, you know, it's a correct challenge. Yes, we did consider, as part of our discussions, smart mobility solutions. You know, there's all sorts of things that can happen in the future, right? And I think it's very important that there is also a piece that we need to do something now. So yeah, we can go for a smart mobility solution that is multiple different types of vehicles coming into a lane or managing the lanes in a smart way, but that's a heck of a lot of infrastructure that's going to have to go in. And even with the best will in the world, I would suggest that that's many, many years away. And the question then becomes, do we do something with what we have now and make that flow better, and then with a mind to improve and then pull in smart mobility options as it progresses? Or do we just say, no, we're not going to do anything now, and we're just going to wait until we can do all the smart lane management as the next step, and then just put it back as it is for now, and you know, don't worry about it? Because I think I would argue that using and helping the buses flow better, admittedly, the numbers for buses don't look great at the moment because of COVID, but as that eases and improves, then people would go on the buses if there's a benefit to doing so. It's a valid challenge you make, Andy. Absolutely.
The challenge wasn't about some future state. The challenge was really about, because I can understand lanes for cyclists, fully understand that, because they're easily bumpable and all the rest of it. The issue for me is buses taking up space, really, and actually the smart junctions can manage that sort of priority. And I'm just wondering whether that needs exploring a bit further. That's all. So I wasn't saying don't do anything.
Okay. I mean, the only other question I wanted to ask you there was, would, you know, if there was buses and then shared ownership vehicles that were able to use those lanes as well, obviously that's going to be an interesting angle. And you may see that is something that increases quite quickly moving forward. You know, that's the other thing to throw in the mix.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks very much indeed. I don't see any further hands up, so I will make sure that
Doug's got a hand up.
Sorry, who is that?
Someone has.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, yeah, sorry, Doug Jenkins, yes.
That's all right, Garfield, no worries. Not so much questions, everyone, but you'll see in our presentation for Upton later a slightly different approach. All I would encourage you to do is look at what the criteria is for a lot of the work you put in. You put a hell of a lot of work in there. The 20 mile per hour is a good example. The criteria isn't about whether it's residential or not, it's about the average speed. And if the average speed... What, shall I carry on?
Carry on, yeah, and I'll comment on that.
Okay, the average speed is the criteria. If it doesn't meet it, then you're up against it already. So that's what the highways look at. And crossings, traffic lights, they've got all sorts of different traffic lights and systems. If you find out what's in already, some you can change and some you can't. Some of the best that are operating at the moment, and putting zebra crossings in are far less safe than pedestrian crossings, like you know, the different traffic light systems. That's why they put them in. They're far more expensive, but they're far safer. So all I would say to you is, you're putting so much work into this. Just check what the criteria is, and if it's a non-starter, then perhaps think about an alternative. Or, I mean, I would like 20s everywhere. That's what we'd love, but we're not going to get it in Upton because we don't meet the criteria. We'd love to change it, but that's not up for discussion at the moment, you know. So that's all I would encourage you to do.
Okay, can I just quickly address that? I can't remember the Department for Transport note number. It's dated 2013, I think. I think there's two paragraphs in that which sort of contradict each other. One talks about existing speeds, which is the one you're talking about, and the local authorities' approach adopted that paragraph number really by saying if the speed was already over, mean speed was already over 24 miles per hour, then no go for 20 miles an hour, because effectively it would take some policing, i.e. you can't introduce it unless, because it's not going to be actively policed, which is a very passive approach. Paragraph 110 of this note, if I could re-find it instantly, basically says that the criterion is residential. And it's a classic Department for Transport note, which gave the opportunity to kind of jump either way you wanted.
Yeah, Mike, I understand all that, and I'm supportive of it. What I'm thinking about is what our local highways do, and what they enforce, and that's what we're sort of in support of, saddled with, challenged with, you know. But that's what we need to sort of follow. Otherwise, we'll just spend so much time and effort going down a route that we'll never get to.
Okay.
Well, the greatest
anyway, that's it. Thanks, Garfield.
Sorry, Mr. Doug, we do need to move on. So I'm sure Mike has got the point. We can't answer right at this moment. And we will make sure that the comments that have been recorded in the chat there are passed on, so that you've got a list of them that you can look at. So as everybody's been pointing out in the comments, very, very good presentation. So thank you very much indeed. So I think it progresses though now, doesn't it? Who's going to be doing the next bit?
It's Dave now.
Dave. Hello, Dave. Right.
Hi there. I'll make this quite quick because I think we've seen most of this already. So if we can move to the next slide. Again, that's just a quick reminder. Now, this will be looked at the last meeting about our approach to communication. So what we're trying to do is get initial communication out, to be very clear on who we are, what we're doing, and what our goals are, in order that we're open, we get that engagement, and we get the trust from our residents. So move forward. And again, there's just a reminder of the channels we're looking at via, the various communities, social media, and potentially face-to-face and door drops as required. Next slide, please. And finally on this piece, this is just the why, the what, who, when, how. So no great surprises there. And again, just to give an indication of what we're going to do and why we're going to do it. Next slide, please. So since the last meeting, we've just been reaching out primarily to a lot more people just to get engagement for the approach that we're taking. As a reminder, this current working group is focused on the A51, and the Upton pilot team are looking at the other side of the city with the A5116. With our approach, we have spoken now to a number of QUAC councillors, especially those impacted in the areas we're looking at. I spoke to Sam Dixon last week. I've also spoken to Mike and Vanessa from the Chester Resident Association group this week. Great call with those guys. And we're also engaged now with QUAC's communication and marketing coordinator, all of which have supported the proposed approach that we're going to take. Next slide, please. Okay, now I won't go through the detail of this, but Vicky Chowdhury and QUAC did a great job of taking some of the words and have packaged it up to make it this format and this look. We've still got to catch up, further meeting with them, and just to tidy it up a little bit more. But this just gives an indication what we expect it to look like, this initial communication, limited to one page, and again, the information we've discussed already. Next slide, please. So here's some of the text from the communication. As we stated already, we're just making very clear who we are. One of the key points here is that we're an independent group of representatives from residents, business communities, and the cycling sustainability groups, just to make sure that people are clear that there is that wide breadth of people engaged. We also include what we mean by pause. We're very keen to be clear to people that the pause doesn't mean stop. What it means is just a halt, so we've got this opportunity to look at further options and further enhancements that can be made. What we also want to do is, be very clear on what happens next. What we're doing, we're looking at the walking and cycling, we're looking at other forms of travel. We're going to align with QUAC's air quality and climate emergency targets. And at the bottom then, really important that we support the economic growth and future success of the city. What we've also put on here, what we're proposing is also 2 email addresses that people can actually start contacting us with any ideas about how we can get involved. Next slide, please. So, in essence, all we're looking for from the task force is to agree the sort of text and style of the initial communication is presented, and the plan to use it as follows. So we're going to use the existing parish council community channels. You've already got those processes in place. We're going to leverage community group channels such as the Upton Community Group and CRAG. We will use the QUAC channels. We've still got to meet with them to confirm that and finalise the document. And where necessary, especially along that Boughton Corridor, we'll use leaflets just to make sure the message gets out. And that's it. Are there any questions?
So we've nothing in the chat, and there was a question there. So the next steps there, we look to the task force to support and agree. I think the general tone of the comments that I've seen are that we do support it. I'll take any questions at all from people who feel that we should not, but I would doubt that, considering the excellent work that's been done by the team and the clear message that's been given out at this point. So okay, so that's you have that support. So thanks very much indeed, team, for a great presentation. Thank you. So over to the second pilot. The first pilot, of course. So John, are you ready to go?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Garfield. Peter Bulmer passes on his apologies. He's on personal business at the last minute that arose. I'm going to talk you through where we're up to with the cycling plan. David Beer is going to comment on the public transport plan, and I'm going to talk you through our plans to produce a plan for the whole of the southeast of Chester. Okay, next slide, please. I think one of the key issues, certainly that's been prominent in our area, is the lack of priority on routes to schools. Routes to schools are treated like any other highway, shared user path or footpath. And when these highways, shared user paths or footpaths are actually faced with waves of children on bikes and on foot, parents dropping off children at school gates, cut through traffic between the A41 and the A51, speeds well above the 20-mile-an-hour limit, and infrastructure that's not designed for these peak flows, we actually have difficulties, which we have developed some solutions to, and we're going to take you through next month. But on Rounton Bridge Road, there's no footpath. On Plough Lane, there are speeding cars at junctions outside Christleton High School. An average speed of 29 miles an hour down Rounton Bridge Road for the last few years in a 20-mile-an-hour limit. School entrance, there are injuries on a regular basis because of the mixture of cars and school children accessing the school. And in the middle of the village, there are 83 pavement mountings and 18 gridlocks over a 5-day period. In the village centre itself, school children are walking through clouds of high PM2.5. These are particles that are small enough to penetrate the lining and lungs and enter the bloodstream of children and will cause serious problems long term. I think the next slide, one of the key sort of recent issues that we've had is dealing with the unsafe nature of the A41 shared user path. Top right is the it's not a very big picture, I don't know whether you can see it, is the A41 shared user path, which is entirely adequate for a single cyclist, but entirely inadequate for several cyclists and pedestrians at school arrival and leaving times. especially when the space is narrowed by parked cars. The photograph below it actually shows the narrow footpath over the railway bridge. Any cyclist coming off this narrow path will find themselves in the path of a vehicle. We have a proposal for these situations. Certainly for the railway bridge, there's a proposal to put a truss bridge across that railway and to actually provide a safe shared user path. I think we need to do something about the vehicles on the A41 shared user path. Next month, we'll tell you more about this. So this is just a taster at this stage. And now I'm going to hand over to David Beer, who's going to tell you about the public transport plan, which is now a plan not just for the South East Chester pilot, but is across the entire pilot.
Thank you, John. If I can have the next slide, please. So the public transport plan, as John quite rightly said, we think would be far better served if this is linked up across the pilots. And there needs to be a focus on what we know are the priorities from transport users. So that's a focus on reliability, frequency, the reach of the network, so where you can get to by bus. And that depends on what people's journey needs are. So we need to understand those. Fares are a key issue because we know that the three key barriers to travelling by public transport are cost, convenience and complexity. So we need to overcome those. And looking at the park and ride services as well to make sure that those are fit for purpose, not only for people accessing the centre from local communities, but also inviting people in from the further afield as well. So we've had an initial meeting with Ian Slater and John Violet joined me talking to Garfield and Christie as well, because we need to understand the transport context within what Cheshire West and Chester have already in the pipeline and already within their planning portfolio. So we discussed some of the issues and some of the limitations around that. One of the opportunities, we understand there's a new post that's starting from next Monday, the 12th of April, the role of decarbonisation officer, which their task will include focus on transport improvements. So there's an opportunity for somebody on the team to start looking at some of these issues. But one of the constraints that particularly Christie pointed out is that currently 93% of services in Cheshire West and Chester are run commercially. Now that means that the bus operators need to show that the services are viable in order to be able to run them. So it's imperative that we engage with those operators and bring them to the table in discussing some of the ideas and potential solutions. And again, it makes sense that if we're going to invite the operators to the table, that we're talking across a broader set of pilots than just South East Chester to be able to engage with them on a broader basis. We also understand from Gerard Rhodes that the Rural Mobility Fund application to central government has been successful, and that will look at a pilot of demand responsible and more flexible transport for Cheshire West and Chester. So again, understanding what's in the pipeline and how that might be able to help is going to be useful. And the bus review process is already underway. There is a bus review task force that is live, and it's their portfolio to look at this bus review. So again, Christie needs to take our pilot needs through to the bus review task force, and again liaise back with us so that we've got some joining up and we're not reinventing the wheel and not treading on each other's toes, but are supporting and helping each other. Alongside this, you may be aware that central government have launched the National Bus Strategy, and that comes along with £3 billion of investment. The report cover there is Bus Back Better. That's what the report looks like, and it's some 80 odd pages in length. But what it's talking about is the aim to make buses more frequent, better reliability, to make them easier to understand and use for people that want to engage with bus services, to have better coordination, and that's not only with bus operators and the local authorities, but also coordination between services and between modes, and also to make the services cheaper, to give better value for money. But this will come with strings attached. What government are asking for is for all local authorities to establish enhanced partnerships with the bus operators by April next year, and also to publish local bus service improvement plans by October this year. So there are some serious strings attached, and there is some work that central government are asking all local authorities to do in order to be able to draw down some of this money to be able to fund those improvements. So the next steps, as we see, are to engage with the operators, to work across the pilots to develop some fundable options, and once we've got those fundable options, to put those options out for consultation to the local communities to check that we've got those right and that they do feed into what people need for their bus services. But I have to add that that needs to be in the context of the coordination with the local authority, but also in the context of what government's asking for. Is the bus service improvement plan going to overtake what the pilots are looking at? So we need to take a more fundamental view, and Cheshire West and Chester need to coordinate what their bus service improvement plans are going to be, and what feeds into what. Do the pilots feed into that, or do they supersede what the pilots are doing? So there are some fundamental questions that we need to answer. But by joining up across the pilots and by talking to people like the Bus Review Task Force, we can put that on a much better footing to be able to deliver the bus improvements that people in Cheshire West and Chester need and deserve. Thanks, John.
Right, thanks, David. We told you last month that we decided to give car users a voice, okay? So we have a team assembled. They're going to start work on an EV charging strategy of South East Chester, which will be just a part of the strategy for the whole of Chester, and we'll input that to appropriately into CWAC. But the big issue this month for us is that we have decided to try and go ahead with a South East Chester plan, something that would provide an ability to get some input, professional input from outside. We're proposing a company called Planet who would visualize all of our cycling plans and provide a professional input to them. Planet, by the way, work in Sheffield, Leeds. They've re-engineered Altrincham, they've been working in Poynton, they're working in Liverpool, they did the centre of Manchester, and indeed they're part of the re-engineering of the middle of Chester as well. So we want them to have a look at the EATL proposals, which you've seen today, which I think are excellent, and we've now got a joint task team working on that together. We want them to provide us with some options for regenerating Boughton Village, to include placemaking with the shared space options for vehicles, cycling, walking, seating, tree planting, al fresco dining, but to actually make it a pleasant place to stop at. So that this isn't just about a roadway change, about cycle paths, it's also about a placemaking activity. And we're going to ask them to visualise those cycling plans, the regenerated Boughton, the Boughton Corridor and Christleton. That team has started some preparatory work this week before engagement with Planet. Next slide, please. Just a comment on critical success factors for our group. One was involvement of CWAC at all levels. We're not getting that involvement at the moment in the South East Chester pilot, so we'll be asking for that from CWAC. We'd like to see more seamless team working with CWAC officers and consultants and contractors, and we're behaving like that, and so we're going to be asking all of our partners to behave like that as well. And we do want to move to a position where infrastructure changes in South East Chester that we're involved in are actually developed jointly with CWAC, and we sign off both on those changes. We want to see a more sort of intimate sort of process for changes, because what we're suggesting for these cycle path changes are a lot of small changes in Great Boughton, in other parts of the area, which require careful thinking through and careful design and consultation of the community. So we're going to be looking hard at how we do that. We'd like to see more data on cycling use and vehicle flows. We've seen some of that. Like the EATL pilot, we are actually short of some data, and we've asked for that. PM 2.5 measurements are important. The A41 and A51 roads both have PM 2.5 levels that are generally higher than the whole of the AQMA in the centre of Chester. And we're arguing that, and just for those who don't understand what that is, that's the air quality management area. That status would provide for more rigid and strict control of air quality on those roads and in the areas around them. And we think that is very appropriate. And we want to basically get to a position where we've got a proposal which could be part of a mini Holland bid if there is any funding available from national government. We're starting to assemble resource. We've got a sufficient number of volunteers. We need more CWAC involvement, and we've involved Planet. And we actually think the Institute of Place Management is a good place for us to go to when we start looking at regeneration of Boughton. So we've made a start, but we've got a long way to go. So thank you, Garfield.
Thank you very much, John. So I think we can take some questions on. There's quite a few comments come through the chat, John, which you might want to kind of take down. Christy, you've mentioned that you're procuring a borough-wide EV strategy. Yep.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yep. So that's something that we'll hear a lot more about. I'm going to say something about the communications that you've mentioned there, and quite rightly highlighted, John. I'll be saying something more about those under the AOB at the end of the meeting, because the ideas that are coming forward from all these pilots do need interaction now with CYCUNG in order to be able to kind of move these forward. And I'll talk a little bit more about that under AOB. So there's plenty of comments in the chat. I don't see any hands up at the moment for a QA here. No? Okay. So we'll move on there, but thanks again, John and David.
There's a hand up from me, Garfield, Andy Farrell.
I can't see your hand at all. Okay, fine. Go on ahead.
Maybe, probably because the presentation's up. Yeah, it's just one thing. It's about the bus element, which I welcome. Actually, it's a question. Is I presume that it's going to be a borough-wide exploration of a bus strategy rather than just a Chester-wide. And to kind of ask that on the basis of being kind of a wider area, Cheshire West as a kind of public transport travel system makes very little sense because many of the interactions are across the border into North Wales. So just a kind of expression that perhaps the bus strategy needs to be Cheshire West and D-side, either Mersey-D Alliance area.
Thanks, Andy. And just to come back on that point, I think there's two tracks here. One is what the pilots are looking at individually, and the other is what central government wants the Cheshire West and Chester Authority to look at across the board in terms of their bus service improvement plans. And I think both need to take into account what you've just said, because I think I agree with what you just said, and the approaches need to make sense for local people to be able to provide an attractive network that people want to use and do use.
Great.
Okay, thank you. And yep, you've got your hand up, yep.
Yeah, I was just wondering whether at any point in this or at any point going forward, was there going to be any consultation with young people, especially when you're looking at places like Criselton, where the main focus is about making it safer for students going to school. So I think that would be very valuable to look at or to do at some point.
So John, can you comment on that?
Sorry, I missed the beginning of that. Could you sort of repeat that, please?
Yeah, no problem. I was wondering if there's been any consultation or whether you're planning on doing any consultation with young people about these changes, especially in places like Criselton.
It's a good question, actually, and we would like more engagement with students in Christleton. A good example was that we did a lot of the air quality monitoring in Christleton using just 1 or 2 volunteers. And we actually tried to get some engagement with students at the high school, and we couldn't get any interest. We accessed the school through the science master and the head. If you can think of a way in which we could engage with students, and whether you could find some who would want to engage with us, we'd find that very useful, actually. What we are going to do, though, that will interest you, at the beginning of next term, we've agreed with the headmaster that there'll be a travel sort of survey carried out. So on one particular day, every student in the school will be asked to explain how they get to school, where they travel from, which routes they choose to use, which ones they don't like because they find them to be unsafe. And we're going to collect all that information in one go for 1,400 students, which will be a first. So that will provide a lot of information. What we could do, having collected that information, we could get a few of interested students together to discuss that data. Is there some way in which you could facilitate or help us with that?
Yeah, that actually links to something I'm doing with Mr. Jones at the moment. We are looking at setting up an eco council for the store, so it can probably feed in to the eco council when we have it.
Well, I think that data will be a good platform for a discussion. Actually, we've never had it before. We don't know which routes students choose. We don't know how many come via the A41 shared user path, for example, how many choose to come down the canal, why they make those decisions, and that will be very useful. And I think we'd like to talk to a group of students about that afterwards. So I'll talk to you about that later, Angie, after the meeting. I know how to contact you.
Okay. Yes, good.
Yep. Thanks, Anya. Thanks very much indeed. Andy Evans.
Yeah, can I just add something to that? So I did type it into the chat, the meeting chat. I've got 3 year 10 and 11 students from Christleton lined up initially to talk to the EATL working group with their experiences of commuting and active travel and getting to and from school and into town. So certainly we've already got some students that have volunteered to come and talk to what would now be the South East Chester and the EATL working group. In addition to that amazing news of that survey there, which I think if you can get success with Christleton, if you can do that for all of the schools in the region, that'd be marvellous. So.
Yes, and the university as well. If we can get them involved as well, Andy, that would be useful. Okay, thanks very much. I can't see any further hands up, so we'll move on. So, Andy, a quick update from you, I believe.
Yes. Just to recap, the idea of this working group is to develop a smart mobility toolkit and framework to input into the development of the council's review of its One City plan for Chester. And I'd like to thank the involvement of both the regeneration team and the transport team in this pilot, because they've taken a very big interest. So thanks very much to them. Still early days. We've now met 3 times, twice in terms of really working together, and once a touch base session over Easter, because many people were away. Subgroups have been established, the components of the toolkit, mobility hubs, smart corridors, the mobility marketplace, city centre living, the first and last mile in the city centre, and gearing up for the new e-world. And it's great to hear that the council's now looking at a charging kind of e-vehicle strategy development. So that's good. Papers have been produced by each of those teams, because they're trying to understand the subject and look at best practice, particularly because none of this is rocket science. It's been piloted and implemented elsewhere. We're having a workshop on Monday next, where all this is brought together, because the team were concerned that there are huge overlaps between each of the components, and they wanted to make sense of an overall joined up toolkit approach. So the idea on Monday is to start to develop this kind of joined up toolkit, and then jump from that to applying it to Chester, and again to produce a framework for the council to take forward. So I've also touched base with the One City Plan process, particularly their consultation stream, and Good for Nothing, a consultation agency in Chester is doing that. So we've now engaged with that. And we've engaged through the regeneration team of the council with its kind of climate emergency funding process. So we've made a bid for funding to help us progress what we're doing, because I think it's getting a bit, it's a rather large topic, and we're a bunch of volunteers. It's actually quite difficult to progress it, and we've got a timescale we have to hit. So some support via the fund would be useful, and we'll hear about that in a month or so's time. So taking a bit longer than we thought, but it's doing well, and we're up and running. And the working groups are producing some really interesting stuff. Okay.
Great. Thanks very much, Andy. That's very useful. Any questions for Andy while we have him potentially sitting in his garden?
It's a backdrop, just my garden, but
yeah, I know it did look nice. Okay. Well, thanks again, Andy. Thanks very much. Okay. It's a great piece of work that's going on there. Good. So, love your Upton, Caroline.
Hi, Garfield. You probably realise that this isn't Caroline, hopefully, unless she's got a very bad cough. I'm just gonna do the first few slides, and Caroline's going to do the last three, if that's okay.
Yes, of course.
Okay, super, thanks. Basically, the way we've approached this is all of the things that we're talking about, sustainable transport, walking, cycling, getting people out of vehicles, better air quality, all of that comes as a must for this. So we haven't seen that as more as a proposal. That's something we've got to do. So as I alluded to before, what we did, we looked at what we could do with what we've currently got initially in Upton, and we sort of put it on its head. So we actually have struck up quite a good working relationship with certain people within CYC to gauge what we can and can't do before we put a lot of effort into the actual solutions. So if we can do the Chris Whitty and go on to the next slide, Christy, please. Thanks. The reason why we were fortunate to end up looking at this communication channel, and we were a bit lucky really, Upton Dean traffic lights were highlighted to us as a bit of an issue, not just because the bus lane was put in, but even before that. So I popped down there, had a look, and it was more than obvious that the traffic light sequencing wasn't right at all. Now, I think most of us would like to think that we understand traffic lights, but believe me, half an hour with the traffic light engineers, and it makes you realise what little we do know. There are lots of different types, and there are some you can change and some you can't change. Fortunately, with these, we were able to work on some of the aspects of the lights, which basically means now, with or without the bus lane, there's less standing traffic on the main carriageways. So that obviously helps congestion and the air quality. A little example, the shot you can see there, the left turn into Upton Dean, people were turning left into Upton Dean. There wasn't anything coming out, but because the way the sensors were set up, the sensors thought there were a vehicle wanting to come out, as you can see in the bottom picture. So they were calling for a green phase and there wasn't anything there. Very similar to the top photograph, people coming from Backford. Whenever there was a green phase for people coming into Chester, the right-hand turn into Upton Dean always came on as standard. So they were the things we noticed. We went to the engineers and we said, look, this is not working properly. And lo and behold, they said, right, we'll fix it. so they have done. And you know, that was an introduction into, fortunately, how we could manage other things going forward. Next slide, please. So a very dodgy picture. I apologise. I am the one on the left as you're looking at it. One of the things we started on March the 15th, the Community Speed Watch. It's taken a while, been very well supported by our parish councillors, especially Jill Holbrook. Thank you very much, Jill, and I know you're listening. It started, as I say, on the 15th of March. We've got 11 volunteers, 22 verified and assessed locations. We've slightly upped the sessions now to 22, and we've got 241 vehicles for exceeding not just the posted speed limit, but it's 10% plus 2. So it's over the permitted speed limit, taking in the allowances. The interesting thing about the 20s we currently have in Upton, the feeling is the police can't prosecute because they're too similar to 30s. So the advice currently, unless they've got roundels and physical attributes to make it distinguish between the two, essentially they won't police the 20s. So what we do, we can actually sort of do the community speed watch in the 20s, 30s and 40s. So we're doing very well with the community speed watch. Got a good call hopefully tomorrow with the 20s plenty representative, and what we're hoping to do, again with the help of the parish council, is to educate people more to the 20s where they are. A lot of people, we get no pleasure in actual fact in reporting people to our PCSO. I tell all the volunteers the best day we'll have with Community Speed Watch is when we don't get anybody exceeding the speed limits. That's a good day, not looking at the highest speed. So we are going to embark again with communicating with the right people on a bit of an education process around Upton as to what the speed is and why they should keep to it. But again, we are talking to highways where we can put banners, where we can't put signs, and so on. So that's working really well for us in Upton. Next slide, please. This is a good example. We started off with a couple of assessed locations in Western Grove. The amount of people that came up to us, families, individuals, and even 2 young kids came up and said, "Oh, what you doing?" And we showed them, and they were really excited about it. And we've now got 6 locations in Western Grove. And again, we don't take any pleasure in people exceeding the speed limits. We've had people up to 39 miles an hour going past the shops on Western Grove. So what we're looking at, and the picture on the bottom there is where you come out of Western Grove onto Wheelstone Lane. It's so wide a junction, and people do cross there. There's a lot of pedestrian traffic, cycling traffic, etc. And because it's open and wide, it just allows people to drive left and right at speeds which aren't appropriate. That's all I can say. So we're going to look at the possibility of a centre island in the middle of the two, which will slow people down a little bit and also make at least that centre island for people crossing a little bit more safety. So it's simple ideas like that that will make a big difference. Just right opposite where you can see on the bottom photograph are the playing fields, and there's some really nice Cheshire fencing there, and that's where we're proposing to put one of the banners to educate people, just to say, look, you are in a 20 area. This is why it's important. Not too much detail. One of the most important things we've learned about the communication with highways is that we can't put anything where there could be a distraction. Now, you might think a banner there is a distraction. There are boundaries, like with everything. So again, just talk to them. The 1 or 2 slides, not on mine, earlier on, was talking about engaging with CYCUNG. Don't wait for them to come to you. You go to them, and they're more than happy to talk to us. I can just tell you that. So that's what we're looking at here. Next slide, please. This was another set of lights. I'm just down the road on Corgle Road from these. And again, it's very similar to Upton Dean. We were getting false green phase call in and so on. The photograph on the bottom left is looking into Heath Road. And people who turn left coming from Chester and turn left into Heath Road, or go straight on across from Corgle Road into Heath Road, you can see just about there's parked cars further up on the left. And the sensors for these traffic lights actually go quite far back. So when there's nothing coming out of Heath Road, again, the vehicles were going over them and calling for a green phase. So it would stop the main carriageway vehicles, which there's quite a lot there. It's quite a busy junction, at least for 12, 15 seconds, and there's nothing there. So again, quick chat with them. Now, it wasn't all good news here because the main traffic lights on the A41 there and the ones going into Cornwall Road, the user system called MOVA or Mover, microprocessor optimized vehicle actuation. And it's great we learn something every day. Now, if we've got one of those, and we've got one of those at Moston traffic lights as well, this is the best in breed at the moment. It may well be superseded in due course, but without knowing these things, you don't know what CWAC and the highways have actually invested in our infrastructure. This is the best in breed. It's very intelligent. It may not seem it sometimes, but it is, and that's the best it's going to get, and you can't change it. But the actual sensors in Heath Road are not part of that system, so we are going to amend that one. And again, it's just something that's going to get done. It's on the list, and it'll get done within 3 or 4 weeks, I would imagine. Again, they're really helpful. Next slide, please. So Moston traffic lights I've just mentioned. What we tried to look at is people coming from Ellesmere Port, Great Sutton, turning right here onto Liverpool Road. A lot of people go in the straight on lane, go straight towards Chester, turn right down Demarge Lane because they don't want to wait at the traffic lights, because at peak time it does get busy. There's no doubt about that. And again, these lights are the, I can't say it all again, MOVA system. They are the best in breed, and that's what we've got. So, either we look at another alternative, and we did throw out there having both lanes coming up from Backford Dip as a right turn. But you can look at other things before you put too much effort into one particular thing. Next slide, please. And I think this one is Caroline's. Are you all right to do this one, Caroline? You know far more about this bid than me.
Yep, I'll take over if that's okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks. I hope it came over that what Doug's trying to do here is lay the foundations and do the tweaks that can be done now to improve the traffic flow and hopefully start encouraging people to walk and cycle within Upton. So there's things that don't cost an awful lot of money, but can make some difference, quite a lot of difference in some circumstances. So we're sort of having a go at the edges, doing as much as we can, and as Doug says, finding out an awful lot what you can't do. So we're not going too far down the wrong road, excuse the pun, to have to bring it back again. Alongside others on this meeting today, we've also applied for feasibility funding for up to £20,000 to do a feasibility study with an outcome of potential of £200,000 capital investment to climate emergency response planning, who seem to have a little bit of money this year. So we're hopeful that we will be successful in that, in order that we can do properly all the measurements that we need to do and have the expertise to inform where to best spend the money to make the changes that we need to achieve. We can go so far with all our brilliant ideas, but we're lucky to have Doug, but generally we're not highways experts. Alongside that, we will be hoping to do a full residents consultation as well. Next slide, please, Garfield. This is a little bit about what we're doing in addition to everything we've just talked about. Cycle mapping is just about to kick off, so we're pinching the brilliant idea of the southeast parishes, going to do the same thing for Upton. We're just stretching our boundaries a little bit to pick up the key destinations that might be a little bit outside of Upton. So that's just started. We're just getting the terms of reference together. We're having high level talks with Stagecoach just about the art of the possible, trying to find out are they up for doing anything ahead of any bus strategy review, improvement talks, etc. Obviously we will feed everything into whatever group is set up to look at the wider piece, and then, to be honest, the talks with Stagecoach will probably just be put on the back burner. In terms of our own experimental active travel lane on the A5116, which, as you know, is also paused, we're still waiting the second after data from Mott MacDonald. The first after data didn't really provide any evidence that it increased cycling or walking or had improved bus times. So we're just waiting for the second after data. And then finally, we've already spoken with Chester Zoo and Countess of Chester Hospital about their plans for active travel, and we, going forward, will obviously be working with them and sharing our ideas. Next slide, which I think is the last one, Garfield. Any questions? Anybody?
Excellent presentation. Thank you very much indeed.
Can I just have a quick one, Garfield? Sorry.
Sorry, can you? Was that? Oh yeah, go on. Yep.
So, sorry, Caroline. The one thing I missed out because it came in just after the slides were done. There is an area of pathway from Heath Road leading up to Demarge Lane on the A41. Part of it's okay, pretty good. The rest of it is in disrepair. It's used by a lot of school kids and a lot of people walking around Upton. And part of the conversation, I brought that up in conversation, and that's going to be put back into fit for purpose state in probably 3 or 4 weeks. So it was just a case of, I don't know whether it was diverting what they were doing already or they felt sorry for me pleading. But at the end of the day, they're going to put that back into some fit state. You know, we'd love it to be a shared user path, but at least it's getting to a point where, you know, we're halfway there. Sorry, that was just after the slides went in.
No, that's fine, Doug. Thanks very much for that. And thanks, Caroline, as well. Any comments at all from people? I know I said it last time, but I do like the logo. I think it's very good indeed. Okay. No. Okay. Thanks very much indeed. And we'll move on to the Ellesmere Port Helsby and Frodsham, our final pilot. So I'll just give you an update on what we've been working on in this particular group, and it's moving really now with some muscle, I think is probably the word. Firstly, just to remind colleagues about the area that this particular pilot covers. We've extended it slightly, taking in feedback from the first meeting that we had, the first of our pilot meetings, to include the A550 on the left, running down that green road, running all the way down from north to south, which has got its problems as far as cycling is concerned and restrictions as well. So we've now included that in the area. And I've included a little more of Delamere Forest just to show the Rural Mobility Fund area, which I'll talk about in a moment. So that's the area we're talking about, and colleagues will know that I'm very keen to see this area prosper and take full advantage really of the beautiful countryside we have in Helsby, Frodsham and Delamere. There are 2 projects in this area which feed directly into the work of the task force, and obviously through our pilot group. This is where we'll be actually doing the work. I mentioned last time the North Cheshire Community Rail Partnership. I put some words there, but the main thing I kind of want to discuss really at the moment is obviously, you know, we're moving very gradually out of lockdown. And one of the things the railways really would like now is for people to start considering using trains. They are very safe, they're very clean. I've travelled on and off, you know, when we've been allowed to, and I've been completely impressed by the way that they're looked after. And it's time to start getting people back onto this transport. So one of the key initiatives that's going to be coming forward from the DFT, and I think it's probably about a month or so away, will be to use the community rail partnerships to get the message out and to start encouraging people to go back to trains, get back on them and start using them for travelling around. So we're going to be doing quite a lot of work in this area, as are all the community rail partnerships. And you may remember that there are close to 80 around the UK, which are funded by the train companies as part of their franchise agreement. So we primarily get funding from Northern, with additional income from Merseytravel and Avanti. So we get funded in order to be able to progress this particular initiative forward. So one of the things that we'll be doing is reaching out to people and saying, do you know where you can get information about times and prices and things like that, about special fares that are going on, about special offers that are going on? Are there any questions that you've got? Are there things that worry you about travelling back on train again? Is there anything about your local station which you would like to see fixed or made better? That's just part of what the CRP do. We're visible on stations, making a change to the actual way in which people engage with railways. We do a lot of work in schools as well. So another message will be going back into schools and saying to them, you know, trains are fine. Yeah, come on, let's look at these again now, because they've taken a bit of bad press. They've had a bit of a bad press over the whole of this lockdown period as being places where you shouldn't really go at all. When, to be honest, they're actually quite safe. So that's one aspect of the work that we're doing at the moment. Just as a recap, that's the area that our particular community rail partnership covers, which is, as you can see, quite extensive. So we've got quite a few stations along there. We've got some of the busiest in the area. We also have the least used in Stanlow and Thornton for obvious reasons. So that's just a map of the community rail area. But I also mentioned last time, and David mentioned it in his presentation earlier, about the Rural Mobility Fund, and Quack have been awarded just over £1 million funding from the DFT for this particular project. And the objectives here are to look and explore whether demand responsive transport can fill a gap in current service provision. So that's quite a loaded phrase, that demand responsive transport. Can I ring up and get on a bus just like that, and the bus is going to come past my door? Yeah, not quite as easy as that, but very close. And surprisingly, there are quite a number of schemes in place now around the country where this happens, and where it supplements the existing services, or in some cases actually replaces them, by looking at patterns of movement which fit better with the way that people live. Now, this fits directly into what we're trying to do as far as the railways are concerned, and the community rail partnership is getting people to travel more easily on them. So if we can get people in the rural communities to actually travel to the stations more easily and continue the journey that way, then that's a win-win. Obviously, we need to know what people think. So part of the work that we're going to be doing at the moment is finding out whether or not people would actually use such a thing, and whether or not there are journeys that we could actually replace by using such a method. So a secondary objective there is to better understand the specific barriers unique to demand responsive transport, and any potential solutions that may establish it. So led by Christy and Jared Rhodes, and I must thank Jared for the work he's doing on this, along with the CRP. We're looking at an app-based pre-booked passenger transport service in the Frodsham, Helsby and area, with a population roughly of about 27,000. And the idea is that they can book the journey using the app, and this will bring the vehicle. In some cases, it'll bring them to either a road end, or in other cases it may bring them to the actual outside their house, depending on the kind of service that we set up. In conjunction with this app, there will be a company who will actually oversee the booking and the arrangements of the transport, which could be through various operators, making a network of available transport. Looking at the map, as you will have seen, we've got connections up to 6 railway stations with these bus services. So perhaps we might be able to find a way of being able to get through tickets. And certainly one of the other things that we're looking at, and I know David Beer and I have talked about this a number of times in the past, is how we can actually get tickets that will enable people to do multiple journeys on different modes of transport. Somebody could get on the train in Ellesmere Port, get off at Helsby, go cycling or walking, maybe jump on a bus, come back and get the train back from Chester, all on one ticket. It seems reasonable that we can do that. And there are external agencies now that will act as a way of being able to do that on our behalf. So that's something else that we're looking at in this particular project. A few notes there about who we'll be engaging with. Obviously, we want to be talking to everybody, just like everybody is at the moment on this particular task force, in order to be able to get their views. And some soft market testing with the operators, just to see whether or not we've got the message right and whether or not the operators could operate the kind of service that we're thinking of. I've been on a couple of presentation calls now with places around the UK where they've actually got these type of schemes in place at the moment. And it's the usual kind of thing. It starts off and people are a bit cautious and they don't really know what it's about. But very gradually they realise that this is a very, very good service and it works perfectly. So I'm hoping that something similar would work in this area. It's a 3-year project. So, excuse me. We'll be starting with the initial consultation material in the next month. So that takes me on then to what our particular group are doing with this. Oh, there's a map there really of the Rural Mobility Fund area. That's the black line, the black dotted line that's running round. And as you can see, it's got Molesworth and Delamere, Acton Bridge Station, as well as Helsby and Frodsham. These will all be in the slides which you can have afterwards. So the next steps then, as far as our particular group is concerned, is bringing these 2, if you like, initiatives, which actually break down into 4 initiatives, but I don't need to do that at the moment. It's a community rail kind of side of things, and we've got the rural mobility side of things. We're bringing them together with one particular working group, which Pilot 4 is going to be looking after. There'll be people from both sides of that particular divide, and they'll be working together to do 2 things. The first thing they're going to do is prepare a flyer, and this will go to the whole household distribution in the area, telling them what we're trying to do, telling them what the initiatives are in their area. And remember, this will be from both the community rail side and getting people interested in travelling on train again, as well as the responsive transport side, and looking at various questions which kind of straddle those borders. What would people really like to see in this area? Would you like to cycle to the station? If there were more cycling spots available at the station, would that help? Do you think you could leave your car there and get it charged while you're there, etc., etc.? So there's lots of questions we can put in there. And as usual, once you actually start doing this, you end up with dozens and dozens, which, would be too many. So the flyer will be a kind of information point, and then that will be linked to an online survey, which will actually gather information for those people who want to give us IPNOR. And obviously, I know people get fed up of surveys and online surveys, so we have to really make sure that we structure it right, and it may be that we break it down into a couple of different surveys depending on the kind of mode that they want. So this is very interesting. I think it's a great piece of work that is going to be happening here. I'll also be presenting the work of the task force as a whole, and our particular pilot one to the Ellesmere Port Development Board in May, who are a great bunch of people, and I'm hoping that I can recruit a couple of people from there to sit on this group and put their input into it. So I hope that's reasonably clear as to what we're doing in that area, but quite a lot of work. And I think I've got a question up there. Let me just flip over to a different screen. Yep. I can't look at that at the moment. Can somebody? Oh, Andy, yeah.
I think Mike Garrett was before me.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go first very quickly then.
Yeah.
Hi, that was very interesting. Two thoughts. You mentioned the funding you get from the train operators.
Yeah.
And of course, that started on rail privatisation when government wanted to have some kind of countervailing force against private sector train operators. We come next month, we're likely to see a government paper, if you like, moving back towards effectively a state-owned passenger network, and the franchising will be history. It hadn't occurred to me until listening to you now, will that be a threat to that kind of funding to community interest groups? Because that regime changes. I haven't got a clue what the answer is, but it's worth taking note of.
I think we've got some fairly good assurance on that. We've certainly got remember this is a national scheme, so it's not just our area.
That's right.
We've got guarantee of the funding starting this next financial year, and you think about the thousands and thousands of community unpaid volunteers that are actually doing all this work. It's very unlikely that the government would turn such a workforce down when you look at the kind of work that it's doing. So
I don't deny that. I'm just saying, it just occurred to me, it might be worth reassuring people that it won't go. That's the point.
Point taken.
The second point I wanted to make very quickly is that the area you're talking about between Ellesmere Port and through Stanlow and Ince is an area of heavy freight. So I'm going to do my freight hat bit. There used to be a lot of rail freight in that area, and I know from studies and exercises we've done over the years, there remains potential to get a lot of road freight back onto rail. So I just want to kind of wave that flag for a moment, because it's worth taking into account.
Yeah, but very much so. Completely agree with you there. We'd love to see more freight in there. Yes.
There are maybe actions that could be taken, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Okay. Good points. Thank you, Mike. Andy.
Great work, Garfield. I think what I wanted to pick out is the synergies between what you're looking at and what the Smart Mobility Pilot is looking at, particularly mobility hubs, which are basically, where you do swap bikes and charge your car, and they, the science is you base them on the existing transportation systems and railway halts and
absolutely, yes,
the places you do it.
Yeah.
And the mobility marketplace is the second one, where actually you join up an app that joins up travel and payment for travel and joins up various modes. So I think what we need to do is have a chat, basically, but also perhaps we need to develop some kind of shared terminology. So we're talking about the language, so we're talking about the same things in the same way. So it makes it all more powerful, doesn't it? If we talk the same way.
Yeah, completely agree.
Okay, great work.
Yeah, it's an exciting project. Yes, thanks very much, Andy. Yeah. Anybody else? Okay, so thank you very much. I just want a big shout out to the members of our team. So they're doing some great work, and hopefully, as I say, we'll have some people from the development board on board at the end of May. So thank you for those people. Okay, so I think we're done there. So let's just finish the. Okay, so if we go back to the agenda, then I've got a slot at number 9 for open questions. These are questions which we sometimes need to take away and get answers for. If you've got questions, we don't seem to have anybody. Anybody got anything that you'd like us to explore? Okay, that's fine, thank you. And we're down to AOB. I've got 2 items of AOB. I think, Kathy, you had a point you wanted to raise. Kathy Harrington. Are you still there, Kathy? Nope. I think she's left. Okay, that's fine. So the other item that I wanted to raise really is in reference to all the presentations that we've seen tonight. All are referencing the fact that discussions with the council need to take place in order to move things forward, and what the detail is and how that can be discussed with them in order to kind of see whether it's feasible, whether or not there are some other existing plans in place for moving these things forward. And I think that's one of the things that we've perhaps been not, and it's been alluded to in a number of the presentations that we've seen tonight, is that communications with the council need to kind of slicken up, I think. So what I've done is I've had a couple of meetings now with Councillor Shaw, and what we're coming up with is the notion of a group that will meet between, if you like, I'm calling it an interface group, that's just a working title, between STTF and council to explore early ideas which are at their early stage, to see whether or not there's anything that they're doing which might take note of. And there's been a couple of things, like for instance the EV charging thing that Christy mentioned earlier, where that would have been useful information to know about, to see if there's any other reason at all why the things that we're working on are not good, or at the same time get their ideas as to what might make them more viable as a way of suggestion. Excuse me. So that's one aspect of this particular group. The second is to look at potential sources of funding. One of the things that came out in the discussions I had with Councillor Shaw was the number of different pots. There are so many, but they all have their own individual characteristics of what they want. So one of the other things that we're hoping that this particular group will do is help us align any future projects as they come forward to these pots, and what we might do in order to be able to make sure that we hit the target bang on. And obviously Mini Holland is a good example of something that comes along. Well, okay, you know, what have we got? Can we make it fit precisely? And hopefully we've got a project. So all being well, I'll be setting that up over the next month. So by the time that we come out of PERDA, we'll actually have something in place that we can move forward with. So I've got some more hands up. I'm managing two screens here, so if I seem a bit slow on picking up the questions, it's because I've got two screens going.
Kathy's back, Garfield. If you
okay, right, Mike, you've got a question, I think.
It was more an observation, building on what you said, Garfield.
Yep.
If you think about the work where the council declared a climate emergency, and the stuff we're doing on the Hydro Hub, and also with HyNet and all the other green initiatives in Cheshire, we do have an opportunity to build a vision of the county and also Chester as, you know, everything being done with the green framework, being a green champion nationally. And I think when in your discussion with the council at that level, to actually think about that much broader context, which gives an extra emphasis and validity to what we're doing to Sustainable Transport Taskforce, would be another high-level component to actually bear in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, spot on. Yeah, thank you for that. Any other questions about the topic I've just raised before I pass over to Kathy? No? Okay, thanks very much. Kathy?
Presumably, Garfield, did you want me to say something about the idea of talking to the council about communications?
No, I thought you wanted to raise the point about the website and past. Oh
yes, I will do that. Yes, fine.
Yes.
I've noticed that on the website, on the council's website for the sustainable transport, we're only showing the current month's or last month's minutes and webcast. So does anybody know what's happening to previous ones? I think it would be a good idea if we had a full list up there so that someone who was new to it could perhaps start at the beginning and follow through all the minutes and see all the webcasts if they so wished. They seem to get overwritten by the most recent one.
Yeah, it's a good point, Kathy. And I think that we were promised our own webpage. It would be nice to have a home, wouldn't it?
It would be good, actually, because I feel that if someone Googles it at the moment, it's actually quite difficult to find, and it would be good to be a lot more prominent.
Yes, we could tuck away at the bottom, and I'm sure I do believe they have been working on it in ICT, but I don't know where they are with it. So I'll chase that up then.
Thanks, Garfield.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. Okay, well, I think Kathy's disappeared. Right. Okay. I think that's it, everybody. I think we've come to the end of the meeting. I see no more hands up, and you can see the date of the next meeting is the 13th of May. So thanks again for your time. We did pretty well there, 2 hours, 2 minutes. So thanks, everybody. And thanks for some great presentations tonight. Some really excellent work being done by everybody. Thank you very much indeed. Cheerio.